our agenda for today. We're going to be looking at advanced setup options and alternatives, so ways of tweaking the GTD method to kind of suit your preferences within ClickUp. We're going to be looking at the weekly review and higher horizons, which are kind of more advanced parts of GTD, but definitely part of the system that we didn't cover last week. And then running a whole team on GTD. If, for example, you have everyone's doing it either together or separately. And then also using GTD if you're the only one on your team, which can be quite tricky. We'll go over a couple of handy dashboards and then go to questions. I had a couple of quotes that I wanted to say, and these quotes are from one of our ClickUp consultants, Martin, who's a GTD trainer. And he said, and I really like this, GTD focuses first on personal productivity. So what works for you works. And the basic idea is that I'm going to show you some methods today that are good practice and they work well. But the key point is not to do, what I say, it's to do what ends up with a positive outcome for you. So if you need to tweak it in a way that works better for you and that works for you, then great, fantastic, do that. Because as long as it is working well for you, that's the outcome we want. And if you're not using parts of it, skip them. Martin suggested that he skips context just because he tends not to use them very much. And so it's not worth the effort of maintaining them. Okay, and first things I need to always mention is if you do go to a space and this plus button here and templates, we do have under this ClickUp tab a getting things done template. So I'm going to be using this template a lot throughout the webinar today as kind of a starting point. So just be aware that it is there and that you can hit use and it'll be imported into your workspace. So my getting things done folder here, this is just that template. I've made a couple of additions based on alternatives that we're going to discuss today, but the key parts of it are the same as that template. Okay, so first thing that people often run into when doing GTD and ClickUp is the inbox. And we also have an inbox feature. And so the question typically comes up is the inbox in ClickUp the same as the inbox in GTD? And the answer is generally no. The inbox in ClickUp is a specific feature which does specific things, and it's not the same as you'd expect an inbox to be in GTD. So the inbox in ClickUp pulls up all of your kind of next things to be looked at. So inbox is kind of like things that you should pay attention to currently. We also have next tabs and unscheduled tabs. And what I would suggest is to, even though they have the same name, don't get too hung up on them, supposed to be the same feature. If what the inbox feature in ClickUp does works for you, great, use it. If it doesn't work for you, fine, don't use it. There are alternatives here. So if we were to use the inbox, well, the way I'd suggest doing that is to learn the hotkey R. So if you press R on your keyboard at any point in time, it's going to bring up this interface, which is to create a reminder. Now, reminders live in your inbox, and they can just be very simple items. They're not as full-bodied as a task, and they don't live in the hierarchy. But they can be really good to remember to do something, to get it out of your head onto paper, so you're not having to remember it. And you can assign a date to this. I would suggest that you don't. And the reason I suggest that is so that all of them will stay together rather than being split up into kind of future dates within your inbox. You can attach documents if it was what you were thinking about in relation to doing this, or delegate it to someone else. Again, I'd say if you're doing GTD, just leave it assigned to yourself with no time. We'll hit save, and then in the inbox, we'll see that item here. And then later on, we can come back and process this and then turn it into a task with this add to list button. And then we'll put it in the appropriate list. So anywhere in ClickUp, no matter what you're doing, you can always just hit R and create a new reminder. And so that can kind of be your dumping ground for thoughts and your inbox. A couple of things with the inbox is that you can see here, I've also got tasks that are coming up mixed in. If you're kind of in a smaller system or can control how you're using ClickUp, you may choose to only do reminders or only do tasks assigned to you with due dates, or you may choose to do both and mix them together. In some cases, you won't get a choice because your company does assign tasks to you and set due dates, and so these will always be in here. And for some people, that won't work. You won't want them to be mixed together. So in that case, what I would suggest as a second option out of 3 is to just create an inbox list in your GTD folder. So this can simply be another list where you type in all of your your brain dumps. And be aware that you can also email into this list. So if we go into list settings here and email instructions, if you copy this address and forward any email to it, it will come into this list, and you can see it'll put in all the details here. So a lot of people kind of go from their email straight into kind of a GTD system. That's a great way of doing it. Cool. And I would highly suggest favoriting a view on this list, so that it kind of appears up here in your favorites bar. I like to pin my favorites bar. If you don't pin it, it's kind of here, but I personally prefer pinning it. Cool, so that's option number 2. One cool thing with using this option is that you can also create a form view, and I'd suggest keeping it very simple, not adding too many custom fields. So I would just add task name, maybe task description. Actually, no, not task description, because we are just kind of getting ideas out of our head. We don't want to be fleshing them out right now. So I might just add that, just task name, and then we can view that form and have it as a link. And I might save this as a link on my mobile, say, or I could embed it into a dashboard. Just make it a really simple, easy entry method to get things into my inbox list. Okay, third option for inbox is to use the notepad. So we have our notepad down here. You'd see the hotkey is P. So at any point you can just type P, and you either got existing notes, or we can create a new note. I might say brain dump here, and then we can just add notes. And you can use all your kind of standard formatting. The key thing is that you can kind of add extra information, but when you're ready, when you're coming back later to process these, what you can do is simply highlight them and create them, turn them into tasks. And you don't have to highlight everything. You can highlight just one bit out of kind of a longer string. So maybe you took a whole bunch of notes, but actually this is the relevant bit. You can make a task just out of that text and not the other text. So that can be really useful. Also, if you do use the Chrome extension, you can access that notepad on any website, not just within ClickUp. So there's a floating button that you can get, and it'll have the notepad within there. So that is option number 3. Option number 4 is, of course, just to do it outside of ClickUp. You know, some people prefer pen and paper. They might just have a little notebook in their pocket or whatever you like to do, and then simply move it from there to ClickUp during the processing phase, rather than the initial capture phase. And that can work very well as well. Okay, so those are my suggestions for inbox. Next up, contexts. So in contexts in the template, we have labels. And so each task can have a labels field. And then at the folder level, we can filter for those in our different contexts. So I can see all the tasks that need to be done at work just by going to the work view. The other option there is tags. Works pretty much the same. You can simply add a tag here that is work. And it'll filter exactly the same. I guess the differences are that context and labels have to be set up beforehand, whereas tags, you can just create them at the time. So I just created that work one just then when I typed it in. Tags are always visible, whereas you can hide the column for labels. Yeah, they're very similar. One thing that's nice about tags is you can click on them and have them be filtered by immediately. So if I take off this filter and then click on this tab, one thing is that there's several actions there, so you have to not click on those 3 dots. But if I clicked on that, and it filters for that tag straight away, which is nice. Cool. Yeah, so basically, whatever your preference is, much the same. I guess one other thing that might change your mind about which one to use is if you do like this plus button a lot, I tend not to use it personally. I tend to use this new task one. But if you do like to use this plus button and add all the details all at once, then you can add tags from here. But you can also add labels from here. So actually I was going to say you can only add tags, but that's not correct. You can do either, so it's fine. Cool. Yeah, I think there was actually a question from that someone had submitted, Karen. So yeah, either one can be accessed from that plus button. Cool, cool. Actually, one thing I did miss from the agenda is we did have some user submitted questions. So I'll be going over them at the end of the content today. All right, next up, I want to talk about the weekly review. So the weekly review in GTD, basically once a week, you should go over things just to kind of constantly bring your process back to kind of a clean, clear state, so that you're very ready and able to work with a clean mind and focus next week or after the review. So the simplest way to do this is with a recurring task. So here I've got one that recurs weekly. Simple as that. I have it create a new task because I'm creating subtasks within here, and I want it to create new subtasks that are unchecked. Whereas if I were to just move the date, it would maintain which ones are checked, which I don't want to have happen. I want them to uncheck. So what I've actually done here, and this is not required. You could put this in any one of these lists as you wish. But one thing that I learned from Martin, which I quite like myself, is he put it in a different list. So actually in this list, if we make this compact, there's only one task. But if you have these expanded as separate tasks, then it's a really nice way to see all of those subtasks. And because this parent task is the one recurring, it will regenerate all of these each week. We don't have to set recurring settings on each one. So that's great. So we can just go through, and there's about 11 steps to David Allen's weekly review process. And we've just got simple statuses here. So it's either open or closed. And so we can simply use that check mark to tick them off as we go through. Real easy. Now, one thing you'll notice there is that I have them separated into these groups. So all of the subtasks are just kind of in this one long list together. But I've got a custom field, I've called it stage, and given them different values in that drop-down custom field. So the parent task is called header, and then we've got get clear, get current, and get creative. And so each one of those is a value, and then we're grouping by that custom field, which just gives us this nice kind of layout with which to work in. So that was one of Martin's ideas. I really think is a very good idea. Cool. So that's my weekly review here. Yeah, and one quote from David Allen is, if you're not doing weekly review, then you're not doing GTD. And I'm very guilty of that. Back when I used GTD a lot, I would use the kind of the flow chart, next action, scheduled, waiting on, but I often skipped the weekly review. But it is very, very useful to kind of keep the rest of the system healthy and working in a way that you can trust it. Because when you can trust it, then you know that any idea you put into your inbox is going to get taken care of. And so you can actually fully mentally let go of it rather than remembering to check your inbox all the time. Okay, in terms of higher horizons. So in GTD, this means kind of planning beyond today. So we have kind of projects and priorities, which is kind of like the next level. Horizon 1, I think it is. And then Horizon 2 is kind of areas of focus. It's like even bigger than projects, the things in your life that you're focusing on. And then the goals and objectives. And then above that, vision. And above that, purpose and principles. And these, projects you might do as lists, but the rest of these tend to be as text. You'll write down your ideas. So typically the best place to do that is in a document. So I've got a doc view here. I've got this one on my weekly review. You could just put it on the folder instead, wherever you prefer to access it. You can, of course, always access it in your docs home area. Cool. If you do want to know more information about what should go into each of these, I would suggest just reading the book. It's the best source of information for what GTD is and how to do it. I'll just try and cover how to do it in ClickUp today. Okay, next big topic is running a whole team on GTD. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. So you might be in, say, a team of 10, and you've decided that all 10 of you are going to use GTD, and you want to be able to do that in ClickUp. So I've got about 3 options here. The first one is to have a GTD folder each. So I've got a space here. I've called it the team GTD, and each person has a folder, and each folder has our GTD kind of layout. So this way, when you are scheduling something to another person, maybe instead of using this waiting on list, you'd simply put that task in the, you could either put it in next actions. I'd prefer to put it in inbox if you are doing a list as an inbox. It doesn't work so well if they're using a notepad or reminders. So if they're using inbox, I would move the task into their inbox. If they're not, I'd maybe just leave it in my waiting on and then assign them. Of course, if it is waiting on someone outside of ClickUp, I would leave it in my waiting on list. Cool. Yeah, otherwise it's very similar to how you'd use GTD personally. So that's option number one. Option number two is instead of having separate folders, you have one shared folder. So I've got one here, I've just called it shared workflow. And this is where you'd all work out of the same lists. And this will only work if you're doing the same type of work. So if you both have the same job role and say there's a next action and either one of you could do this, then this will make some sense. If you're say very different roles, so perhaps one of you is in marketing, one of you is in IT, only one of you is going to be able to do this task, and so you're going to start assigning assignees, and it's going to make just a little bit less sense. So if you are doing all the same work, this could work quite well. It's everyone's job to process things. You might have to create some rules about when and how that happens, so it's kind of evenly distributed. Everyone pulls from next lists. Everyone's task can be scheduled. You probably will assign assignees here because maybe not everyone needs to attend each calendared event. Waiting on and delegated will typically be someone outside of ClickUp. And then you have your projects, your someday maybe list and reference as usual. And then you'll have to decide on how you want to collectively do a review. Okay, so that's option number two. Option three is a cross-sectional workflow. So what this means is you might have a regular hierarchy, say, with your standard project management type hierarchy, but you still want to do GTD as a team without changing the hierarchy. And so the way we're going to do that is go up to the everything view and do it based on views. So you see here, I've got a next view, a waiting on, someday maybe referenced, and uncategorized, I'll talk about in a minute. So in order to filter something into a view, it needs some sort of marker. So you can see here, I've created a custom field, which is a drop down with all of our kind of statuses, and the view is filtering based on that drop down. Now, if you didn't want to do that, you could instead do it as statuses. I think both are okay. Statuses kind of are a major feature. If you don't have anything else you need to use as statuses, that could be good. A lot of people may have, workflows that need to be complete before it's considered done, in which case the custom field may work better. It just depends exactly how in-depth your work is, how many steps it's got. A less common way to do this would be based on priority or due date. You could have next actions as the ones that are scheduled for the next week, but it's not quite typical GTD. That would be a bit of an adjustment. And of course, you could use tags. It's probably not my suggested in this case, although it could work fine if that's a preference for you. And the last thing I'd suggest is to have probably a doc view, but just somewhere, somehow, some sort of agreement between the team on how we work, no matter which one of these you're doing, and just so that we're all kind of interacting the same way, and we have expectations about how we're managing the system. Cool, so those are the three options. First one is everyone has their own folder. Second one is one shared folder. And third one is views as the different sections, and then some sort of marker. And that means that everyone can kind of maintain their own department. So you say you'd have tasks here from the marketing department and also tasks from the IT department, and they could all use the same custom field and be working through the GTD type workflow. Okay. Next up is using GTD if you're the only one. Now this is trickier because basically what that's going to mean is there's some sort of hierarchy and method that's been established by your company, and you need to not interrupt that. but you also want to do GTD on top of it just for yourself. The nice thing about having the whole team do GTD is you can add this custom field, which is global. This applies to every single task on the whole workspace. And if everyone's doing GTD, that's okay. But if it's just you, adding a custom field for everyone to every task is probably not okay. It's too cluttersome, too in the way when only one person is using it. So there's a couple of options here. Option one, and probably the simplest, is just to have your own GTD folder. Have somewhere where this is your name and your folder. And that works well if you're mostly doing your own work. It does start to fall apart if you get assigned tasks in lots of different spaces and folders. So like for myself, this was the situation that I was in. I use GTD, the rest of my team does not, but I do get assigned things all across the workspace. So, duplicating it in here was not a good option. I had to do something different. Option number 3, I'm actually going to jump to it, is tasks and multiple lists. So it's the same thing. You could have your own folder here, and then when you get assigned things in other folders, you can simply also add it here. So for example, if I got assigned, say, a client in here, and I'm doing this task 2, and it gets assigned to me, then what I would do is just add it to another list. Let's say, okay, this is well defined. I'm going to add this to getting things done, either my inbox or my next actions. I'll be good and add it to my inbox so I can process it later. And that way I still have everything all in one space. So if I go to my inbox here, I've got it within my realm, even though it's actually living in the work hierarchy that everyone else is working in. Okay, so that's option 1 and option 3. Either option 1 is just keeping it purely in here. Option 3 is using tasks and multiple lists to put it into here. Option 2 is to do the same as we were doing before, but privately. So these are all public lists. We can instead make them personal, and we'd say convert view. And that's going to give us a filtered list of these different steps. The next question is, how do we mark them? How do we mark them in a way that's not going to interrupt everyone else and kind of clutter it? Like statuses aren't going to work, custom fields aren't going to work. Typically, what I will do is I will use tags. So I'll create some tags for myself. I used to have just kind of short names. So my name's Justin, so I put a J. I'll put like J next, and I probably wouldn't use reference or someday maybe. Like those are typically okay to put in your own list, but certainly next and maybe inbox as well. I used to call them different things because I wasn't too much of a purist, but you get the kind of idea. And maybe waiting on. So tags, people can get notifications about them, but they tend to have turned that off, and they don't really get in people's way. They're kind of off to the side. So it can be a good option, and then you can then go to your views here, and instead of filtering on a custom field, you can simply filter on tag is, and then choose the tag that you've created. You will need to create that tag in each space, but once you've done so, it'll all be considered the same tag for the filter. And it won't show up as duplicate anywhere, so you're all good. Cool, okay, a couple of notes. So with that uncategorized one, this is typically where I set, in this case, the custom field is not set. You do the same thing with tags. Tags, the easiest one is just to go is not any and select all of them, which is annoying. We're hoping to have another option there soon. Just to any that, actually no, sorry. The correct way to do it is not any, and then select all of your specific tags. So it should only be 3 or 4 for your different categories here. Yeah, and so then you'll have, actually in that case it won't work as well, because with our custom field, we expect every task to have a value. I probably actually wouldn't use uncategorized for tags, because you are expecting a lot of tasks to not be tagged. You could do it's assigned to you and it doesn't have a tag, but there's a chance that someone won't assign you as well. See how it goes for you. It may be valuable depending on your setup. It may not be. Okay, cool. And then the very last option, which I suggest for almost no one, it is the nuclear option, but I have used it before, just when I needed complete control over something, is just a dashboard is what I prefer to use with a text block and just task mentions. And I'll manually create a list of tasks. And the reason I don't suggest this is because it's manual and it takes a bunch more work, but I have complete and utter control over this. And sometimes that is necessary. So anyway, if everything else is frustrating you and you want a nuclear option, that is one. Cool. All right, next up, I want to talk about projects in GTD. So typically, there's a couple of different ways of doing projects. One option is to have a list for it. I would suggest this if you have smaller projects. So a list for it, and then each task is a project. So this one is poorly named as a subtask. Let's call this project 1. And then within this project, the steps can be subtasks. Or you can use checklist as well if your steps are quite simple, kind of just tick them off as you go. That's one option. If your projects are bigger than that and you kind of need whole tasks for each step, then I would suggest having a projects folder where each project is a list. And if they're bigger than that, you can have a project space and each project is a folder, but then you're heading towards traditional project management. But that does work as well. Cool. The big thing there is then figuring out how to get your next action into your next list. So we can see here I'm using statuses for my GTD flow. And so it's simply marked as next, and then it will pull into a filter. We can do it on our space here, or our everything filter will pick that up as well. So we'll go filter, status is next, and then I'd name this this view next. Another way of doing it, so this could be done with the custom field, the tag, however you prefer to mark it. Where were we? Projects. Yeah. Another way to do it is to set up dependencies. So you can see this task here is blocking this task. If I go into that task, you can see it up here. So I've just gone, this task is blocking, and then I added task number 2. And you can see it's already there, but I'll search for it as well. Task 2, and if it was not already added, you see it here, and click it to add. The Gantt view is very quick for adding dependencies. You can simply drag this little dot and put it somewhere else. The key thing is that in order for tasks to appear on the Gantt view, they need to be scheduled. And in my case, I often have unscheduled tasks in projects, and they're just kind of ordered but not scheduled. So Gantt view doesn't work for me. I just do it within the task itself. So in this case, waiting on means something else must come before it. Blocking means something must come after it. This task is blocking something else, or this task is waiting on something before it. Link is just arbitrary, not too relevant in this case. Okay, then what we can do is, again, at that same level, either the space or folder, whatever, or everything, whatever is above all of your projects, we can set a filter and use the dependency filter. So we'll say dependency has blocking, and what that's going to pull is the first task. The first task that is blocking all others will show up here. And that will kind of automatically adjust. So as this task gets complete, the next one will show up. So typically what you're expecting to do there is to have a list of tasks. So you have, say, task 3, and then task 2 is waiting on task 1, but it's also blocking task 3. Cool. And what I would do is I would say, I'll always create a task called end of project, because if I were to finish task 1, let's do it here, task 1 and task 2, then technically task 3 isn't blocking anything, and so it won't show up in our next list. So what I'll do is I'll make sure it's gone green because it's unblocked. I'll make sure that this one is blocking the end of project, just to make sure that it still comes up with a blocking dependency once it's the final task left. Cool. So the benefit of that is that once you set it up, it'll automatically go through all of your tasks until the end of the project, marking each one as, or yeah, marking each one so it can come up in your next filter. Cool. And of course, we can use the same options as before of using tasks in multiple lists to put them in our next actions list. Finally, we have automations, which are neat and can move things between folders. However, I typically don't suggest it for this, simply because in order to trigger an automation, something needs to have happened, and you can typically use that thing for the filter anyway. So, I mean, maybe the one that's useful here is due date arrives. This doesn't exist in filters, or actually it might be, start date arrives, and then move to folder. That could be useful, but in general, you'd only use this if your preference is to fully move it rather than just filtering it. If that's your preference, automation will work nice. You can do it based on, custom field changes, and you could choose GTD and say, okay, when it moves to next, then we want to move it to a different list. Move to list, select list. We'll put it in this flow and say next actions. So when it's marked as next, put it in the next actions folder or list. So yeah, that can be useful if you want to always be moving things rather than filtering them. Cool. All right. Last thing here is dashboards. Then we'll go into some pre-submitted questions and then the questions that you have in the Q&A section. So typically I don't suggest a ton of dashboards for GTD. GTD is more about getting work done rather than reporting on it. But there are a couple of suggestions I have here. So one is like a work interface where you just want to pull together things that are useful to you just into kind of like one view and see them quite easily. So you can see I've got a scheduled today. This is a task list widget, and it's simply filtered to show what is due today. Okay, so anything that's on my calendar due today, I'll see it here, which is really great. Then I have my next tasks, and this is again a task list. The way it's set up depends on how you're running things. So in my case here, I've just got it on my next actions list. But you could instead, use a filter if you're filtering for next actions. That's fine as well. Yeah, however you set it up. I do tend to group by none, just so that things are nice and compact here, rather than being split up into multiple groups. So that's on both of these. Then I've got a project overview, and this is a portfolio widget. And I'm showing just a couple of fields. I've got each project here, the statuses in this project, the progress, and you can add other fields like overview if you prefer with this plus button. I often don't. I often just keep it quite simple. Then I've got a pie chart of my contexts. So I can see how many tasks are in each context. If I've got a lot building up in one area, I might know that I need to book an appointment with my accountant. There's lots that needs to be done. And you can have counters, and this is with the calculation widget of whatever you like. In this case, I'm looking at my waiting on and delegated folder and simply counting how many tasks there are in there. Just because if that gets too high, that might be a bit of a risk. Okay, and then there's more space here to create whatever you like with widgets. There's certainly lots of charts that could be useful. And in terms of this context chart, if you are on the unlimited plan, I think that's accurate, you can do it with a pie chart based on tags. That's going to be no worries at all. I think you'd need to be on the business plan to do it with the labels custom field. I don't think there's a pre-built one for that. Yep. But if you are on a business plan, you can use the custom pie chart. Cool. If you are doing GTD with a team, you may wish to have kind of like an overview of the whole team's progress. So again, I'd have the same thing with context. And then just a bit of a counters here for the different things, just to make sure we don't have too much building up in our inbox or next, or waiting on is perhaps the other risk one. Then we've got our projects, same thing here. I've made it a bit wider just so we can include some extra information. And then I've got a line chart, and this is a stacked line chart, just to see how our statuses are changing over time. So, how much is coming into our inbox, how much is getting into next tasks, and how much is getting done. And that'll give us a pretty little chart. And I would suggest constraining that by a location to just whichever folders or lists make sense to you. So actually in this one, I'd probably take out weekly review, reference, and tickler file. Maybe even, well, waiting on delegate is probably fine. Yeah. Cool. So those are some suggestions for dashboards. Obviously, there's much more that can be done, many more widgets to add, but hopefully that'll get you started. Okay, jumping into some pre-submitted questions. The question, you may have gotten this email if you signed up before a certain point. The question was, what is the biggest struggle or blocker you have in implementing GTD in ClickUp? Cool, so we've got a couple of questions here. So one, I'm going to get this name wrong, but Andre asked, how much time do you spend registering things? So that probably means, taking things into inbox and then processing them. And the answer is quite a bit. And that is a expected time cost of GTD. You do spend more time upfront, making sure that your tasks are all written down, so you don't have to remember them, and well processed, so that each thing you know exactly what to do. When you come to a task, you shouldn't have to think, what is this task about? What am I actually trying to achieve here? That should already be quite obvious. So yeah, GTD by nature tends to be heavier on the beginning. I personally, I might spend half an hour processing per day, and then jotting down ideas is just whenever it comes up. Okay, Marcos asked, what about the planned time to do something versus its deadline? So what that means is you might have a due date, this date, but you may be planning to do it on the 14th, and how do you manage that? And that's a really good question. So people would address this in different ways. Typically, you'll just choose another field to put that date in. So you might put the start date as the date you choose to do it. You may create a custom field with a date custom field and put that in. Which one you use for which? Basically, due date is going to be good for giving you alerts and notifications. So a lot of people will leave that for the deadline, although some people might prefer to use that for when they want to get it done and then have the deadline just as a custom field. Be aware the custom field won't give you those same alerts, so it won't be as obvious when it's passing. Okay. Got a question, weekly review plus link what I do with my goals and perspective. I think we covered that in our weekly review one. You can, in your goals and perspective, say if you have projects and priorities, you can @mention tasks here if you do have specific tasks that are involved in that. Although I'd suggest not going too heavily in that because the point of this is to do it at that higher level. Yeah, so hopefully we've covered how to do weekly review here. Can you create an assignee that is not in ClickUp and put it in waiting for? The general answer is no, although you can say create a guest. And what I do, because I use a Gmail account, is I'll create a guest with, so say example, and you just go +1, +2, +3 @gmail.com or whatever your Gmail address is. And these will all be the same as that address. So that and this are the same, and therefore I can create fake people. And I will use my guest accounts to do that. Do be aware there is a limit to guest accounts, although if you do make them read-only, those don't count. So you can have unlimited guest accounts with read-only. So I might say example +5 @gmail.com. Next, give it read-only access, and then invite, and that will kind of create a person that will act like a person on ClickUp, but obviously no one is at the other end of that email. So that can be one way of doing that. And yeah, as long as you keep it read-only, you could technically have an unlimited number of those if you wish. How can I keep some of my GTD visible and assigned to my team and keep some information private? I'd like to operate in one folder and just use filters to swap. So typically I'd suggest having separate lists or separate folders. and then setting up privacy on them. If you did want to just use one list, you can set up privacy on each individual task, but it's a lot of effort. You can make it private and then invite the specific we need. I wouldn't suggest it as a general method of doing work because it's too much maintenance. I would suggest doing it at the list or folder level, and then you can just drag and drop tasks in or out of there to make them private or not. Okay. Some of these we've already answered. I've tried to move them into the content as much as possible. So be able to view tasks together in one place for the upcoming week. If you're using due dates, that's very easy. So you can simply filter on, instead of that one, let's get rid of that one. Due date is in the next 7 days. Fantastic. If you're not using due dates, it becomes trickier because the system has no way of identifying what is in the next week for you. You know, that's kind of in your head. You could use some sort of marker, like a custom field, particularly if you're already using the next status. You probably do it based on that rather than what's in the next week. If you are really wanting to be time-based, I would suggest using due dates. The other thing you can do is group by due dates, which can be handy as well. Cool. And someone asked about checklists versus statuses. Yeah, so statuses are kind of more for workflow, whereas checklists tend to be ticking off items. You could use them for the same purposes. You wouldn't use them for next and that, but you kind of like, you know, step 1 in a workflow, step 2, step 3. You have to have statuses. You don't have to have checklists. So if you need to, I'd say use checklists, fine. But if you only need one, use statuses because you have to use them anyway. There's no point having steps here and then kind of ignoring statuses, if that makes sense. Automations that support GTD. I think we covered them briefly before. There aren't tons that are specific to GTD. Probably just add what is useful for you specifically as you find you're doing things repetitively. The only one that kind of is core is when a trigger happens, move it to another list to manage a GTD system. Depending on your circumstance, that one could be very useful. Cool, all right. I'm gonna jump now into questions that were, actually no, let's do our sneak peek. I've got all about it. Okay, let's go in here. Okay, so a sneak peek is basically just a look at what features are coming out. Now you may be aware that we have been changing our focus. At the moment, we had some speed issues in the last little while. So we've been focusing a lot on just performance and bugs and that sort of thing. So we won't be releasing quite as much as we have in the past. We've had some really enormous feature releases in the last couple of months. But I did want to just point out a small thing that we're coming out, and that is the ability to give different time estimates to different people on the same task. So we can see here we've got a task and we've got a time estimate of 10 hours total, but actually that's 2 hours for one person and 8 hours for another. So that's a feature we've been working on and it's planned to come out, I think today actually. It's a real quick one. So yeah, look forward to that. Okay, and then on to questions. Can you review how to do automated status change again? Okay, sure. So in any list, you can click on the automations button here. And you can, if you go to statuses, okay, any that end with a status change, like give you a pre-made recipe, or you can just jump straight to the customization builder. So you can choose any trigger you like. Maybe it changes status when the assignee is changed. Maybe it changes status when the due date arrives, when a custom field changes. Up to you what the trigger is. Let's say, you know, start date arrives. And then here would say the action. So when this happens, do this action. So then we want to change the status. Choose here, change status. And we can choose the new status that we want it to be in. So here it'll get marked complete. And then we'll hit create. That's it. Okay, can I use automations for the subtask level? They do apply. There's not a filter to only use them at the subtask level. So for example, if a person is assigned, assignee changes to someone, say to me, then we can change the status, and that will apply to subtasks. Some things won't apply, like obviously you can't move a subtask to a different list, it has to stay with its parent. But I don't believe there's currently a way to only do things to subtasks. So hopefully that answer helps. For the horizon views, can you show how to have pinned views that might be able to separate projects by time frame? Active this month, deferred someday maybe. Okay. So it depends how you're doing projects. Assuming that projects are a task, that will make sense. If they're lists, then you can just separate them out with the hierarchy. You know, have a folder for each one of those time periods. So what I'd do is, okay, yeah, you're creating new views. Great. You're then pinning those views. So this one will do this little pin icon. It's going to go out to the side so it's easy to get to. We might rename it. So this one is kind of, I think active was one of the statuses mentioned. And then it's just filtering based on some sort of marker. And you have to decide what your marker is. So it could be that you just kind of, within that GTD one, instead of saying project step, you might say, you know, have three, like active project, this month project, blah, blah, blah for project. Or you might do it based on due dates, you know, however you'd prefer to use your marker and your filtering. But that's the basic structure of it. Okay, is there an automation that allows a task to be moved but exist in both lists? So we have the task in multiple list feature. I don't think it's in automation yet, although that is a very good idea. Oh, that's triggers. I should be looking at actions. So yeah, I believe the answer is no, but that's a very good idea. I'm actually going to write that one down. Cool. Please show some more weekly review examples. So I haven't actually created examples. These are literally just the ones from the book. Yeah, so I'm not actually quite sure what else to show you here. So each one of these is just a name. I haven't put a description in it because they're typically quite small tasks. So it's just collect loose materials, get your inbox to 0, empty your head, everything that's talked about in the book. Yeah, if you didn't want to do it as a recurring task, you could do it as a list template, but I think that's innately less efficient. You could put this task somewhere else. Those are the only real things I can think of. There's a sub-question there of, do you use alerts? Yes, so I have the due date as today, so it's recurring, so I will get a notification about it. And I have my notification set up, so I do get notifications from due dates arriving. I think that's generally a good idea. Can you use fields within the automations? Mostly no. And the second part of that question is, when will that be available? And the answer is soon, hopefully. So it's a feature we've already started working on, and it is available in a couple of places, but that will kind of become wider and wider as we develop it. I believe it is currently possible with some of our integrations. So Twilio is an integration that sends SMSs. So let's try, and I don't have it set up. I don't think I can actually show you that right now. But yeah, you have this kind of basic idea that you can use some fields in this message. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. It is on the plans. Okay, the value within a task, e.g. a custom field of a lead could be used to call a webhook and pass in lead name. Yeah, so with your automations, if you did want to use the action of, where is it? Create a webhook here, call webhook, and the URL. Oh, there we go, great, thank you. So this is an example of using our custom fields, or sorry, not custom fields, values from the trigger in the action here. So this is kind of what it'll look like. Thank you, Andy. Could an alert be set up for a start date and time rather than June? Yes. So our notifications, there's a whole bunch of options if you go into your settings and notifications, and what you want to get alerted for. Specifically with start and due dates, you can have it if it's changes, but you can also have one before the start date happens, before the due date. So yeah, in this case, if you want it on the start date, I'd probably do it like 5 minutes before, maybe for just your tasks, and you can have it within ClickUp. You can also, within ClickUp is this one. You can also have it on mobile and also email if you prefer. So yeah, that's all an option. I'm going to uncheck these because it's a demo account. I don't actually want notifications for it. I used specific lists to process my weekly review. Okay, is there a way to do it? Is there a way to it, a link URL to the subtask of the checklist you noted? Okay, so if you want to use a URL to get straight to that subtask, then yeah, definitely. So let's open a subtask here and go to full screen. So that their URL is going to be unique to this subtask. So 1YQ, if we were to go into a different subtask, it's going to have a slightly different one. That's the end letters are changed. So if you copy and paste that, you'll be able to get straight back to the subtask using that URL. Okay, and that is it for questions. So we'll finish up there for today. Thank you for joining our webinar here. I hope that's been really helpful and given you some good ideas on how you can adjust or other ways of using GTD within ClickUp.